joining us. Yes. So, here, talk to us. Okay, vamos, ce l'hai. He's done. How did you hear me? Sorry. But Zoom can really chair. Yeah. Seriously. So to the nation go wrong. Which during the session? This one to pull on the floor.
So do we have a way of confirming? I know one of the panelists is joining us online, so do we have a way of knowing if they're already there? Oh, okay, Edmund is there. Who's the other one? Yeah, this is just there. Edmund is there, and Lucy is already there, right? Yeah,
I think there's a third person.
yeah. I think those ones are joining us virtually, right?
I don't know.
Is that-
Adequaji is here.
Yes, this is just here.
Edmond is here.
Yeah,
Getting with faith,
yeah.
not here.
Okay. So what? Maybe she's going to join us online. So just let me know when we should begin.
Yeah,
We can
fine.
begin now.
Yes.
I think you're skipping. Do you have a copy of the program? Just give it from your phone.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Paul Uwe. I'm a faculty member in the Department of English, Literature at the University of Waterloo, and co-convener of the SPANEL on Lagos as a text in African tradition of the media. There are three other panelists, and I think I see two of them online. Maybe the other person is going to join us later. We have Edmond Kofa, who is going to be doing his presentation. Okay, on interspecies liminalities and Cybergian futurity in local affairs in Lagos, a response to an Achillean dilemma by Edmond Kofa. We have the other one, I'm trying to, okay. Echoes of Lagos in Indigenous Written Verses by Chinyere Faith of Wobi, University of Lagos. Hopefully she's going to join us later. And then we also have Adesoji Babalola, who's from Queen's University and is going to be doing a presentation on Singing the City, Reconstructing Lagos Identities in Afrobeat Music. And then myself, who's going to be talking on my current book project on Femi Dubeni, and the title of my presentation. I've made minor adjustments to it, but I'll talk about that later on. From the weekend to the philanthropic city, affect and activism in Femi Dubeni's degrees. Now, I want to provide a little bit of context to the ideas underpinning this panel. Last year, I had the privilege of reviewing Coda Rand's work, Lagos Never Spoils. And in that book project, he was interested in examining the particular kinds of aesthetic protocols deployed by Nollywood filmmakers, not to essentially capture the physical or demographic transformations happening in Lagos, but the kinds of moral and cultural shifts taking place in urban spaces, right? Because usually when we think about the city and the transformations happening there, you always assume that those transformations are very physical, right? So you're looking at architectural changes, you're looking at building of structures, you're looking at the constructions of growth. But he was arguing that the particular ways in which Nollywood, and by extension, which is what we're trying to this panel, other kinds of cultural representations can give us a sense of the historical shifts that sort of trigger different kinds of moral choices and decisions that people take in urban settings. And so that's what this panel is about, looking at the particular ways in which writers, filmmakers, artists, and other cultural producers are deploying different kinds of aesthetic protocols to document the moral changes or shifts happening in urban spaces, particularly Lagos. So the first presenter, I guess, is going to be Edmund. Are you good to go? Since this other person is not around, are you willing to go first, and then Soji and myself, and hopefully that at some point our fourth presenter will join us.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, I can. I guess I can go. How many minutes do I have, Paul?
Essentially, you have about 15 minutes. We have an hour and a half. So I'm hoping that we'll each do 15 minutes, and then after we would have half an hour to have conversations.
Okay. I'm unable to share my screen. I don't know if someone can help me with that. Sorry. But I can just go ahead while that gets sorted. I was trying to share my slide, but I can just go ahead. So yes, I'm happy to be here. This is my first LSA conference, and I'm happy that Paul and I were able to organize this panel. So the title of my presentation is on interspecies liminalities and Cyborgian futurity in Okorafo's Lagos. And just to give a bit of context to what I'm thinking about here. So my research is basically in those of African futurism and Afrofuturism. And I have been invested in just the supernatural, anything that has to do with the supernatural, anything that has to do with the non-human. And so I think through science fictional imaginings of the non-human and supernatural imaginings of the non-human. So that forms the kind of context for how I'm thinking about Lagos as the most populous nation, most populous city in Africa, and this is something that I'm drawing on from Okorafor, Inedi Okorafor, that there is a chance that within a city like that, there will be non-human beings that interact and engage with the human inhabitants. So that's a kind of speculative premise that I'm thinking through here. And so what I hope to do today is to discuss in what ways an analysis or reading of Inedi Okorafor's novels responds to literary predecessor Chinua Achebe's imagining of a central tension. Now, this tension is marked by the relations that ensue when human groups encounter each other, and difference emerges as the sort of hyper-imperative, the single most crucial index that inform any association between the groups. In other words, as both Achebe and Okorafor explore in their novels, difference is an a priori descriptor and factor that overdetermines the relationship between human bodies. Now, I want to highlight bodies, the fact of the corporeal and the social metrics inscribed on, by, and through the body as the foremost side of inquiry in this discussion. An Achebean dilemma, as I describe it, is one that is inscribed in the body not only as material fact, but a cultural, historical, and social product. And so in describing what I'm referring to as an interspecial liminality and a cyborgian future, we are reflecting on the relational tensions between bodies, a negotiation and rejection of the normed or normative body. Now, when we think about the alien as the kind of hyper-exaggerated non-human body, and how that the fact of the alien body, particularly as we have it in science fiction, incites or initiates some kind of human anxiety and paranoia, right? And so in science fictional text, when we gaze upon the different body or the alien body, what has been the natural or logical consequence of gazing upon the non-human body is some anxiety, is some paranoia. And so that is important. And so as a kind of summarizing what I'm referring to as an Achibian dilemma, you want to think about this Achebe's philosophy of which he draws on from Igbo philosophy, of course, duality and difference. This idea of the dual of duality and difference. So in Achebe's work, particularly in Things Fall Apart, there's a kind of psychical drama that revolves around the clash between traditional African cultures and the disruptive forces of colonialism and Western influence. Achebe explores how colonization not only dismantles indigenous political, social, and religious structures, but also forces individuals and communities into difficult negotiations of identity, belonging, and resistance. And so this negotiation of identity, belonging, and resistance maps onto the novel's peculiar imagining of corporeal difference, what I'm describing as the body, and what plays out as an unwillingness to accept difference. And of course, we see this with Okonkwo and Okonkwo's struggle with new dispensation, Obi Okonkwo's struggle with traditional values and Western modernity as this educated a man who comes into this new dispensation and has to fit in and has to negotiate what it means to exist within this particular space. And so I want to very quickly, so this is what I'm describing as a kind of Achabian tension, this negotiation of difference, this negotiation of bodies that exist in that in his work. And so in Okorafor's novels, Okorafor's novels about aliens that arrive in Lagos, and the aliens that arrive in Lagos are shape-shifting aliens. What is particularly interesting about these aliens is that they emerge from Lagos's waters, so they are kind of amphibious aliens that because they kind of shuttle between human and non-human. And so one of the aliens that we have in Okorafor's novel Lagoon is Ayodele. Ayodele is described as a shape-shifting alien. So at one point we see Ayodele as this dark-haired woman, but Ayodele, because she shapeshifts, can also become a lizard, can also shift into just different bodies. So the aliens that arrive in Lagos are shape-shifting aliens, and this kind of draws on this Achabian idea of duality and difference. Now, in this reading of duality and difference, there's a rejection of the absolute, of the essence, right? So there's not just a normed body or a normative body. There are fluid bodies that shift and change. There are queer bodies that shift and change. They exist in a kind of liminal space. They are not just one thing, and that's essentially what I'm exploring here. And so in the world that Okorafor, oh, I just saw that. Sorry, give me a second. Can I share my? I just. Sorry, give me a second. I don't know if I can share my screen now. It says, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'll just go ahead and talk through this. But yes, so in the Lagos that we encounter in Okorafor's there's an interesting quote in the novel, and my pidgin is not very good, but I'll read it anyway. Lagos, no man's land, right? Lagos isn't for anyone. Lagos isn't for just one person. Lagos is a kind of metropolis that is multi-special. There are different people, there are different bodies with the Lagos space. And this is the kind of world that Okorafor presents us. It's a world are coexisting in the same space as the human inhabitants within that space. Now, what is particularly one of the events in the novel that is particularly instructive is that there's a final scene in the novel where the alien martyrs, he kind of dies. The alien martyrs herself, and her essence dissipates into the Lagos space, and the Lagos inhabitants, the humans within Lagos, inhale the essence. Now, what happens is that we have a kind of, because they inhale alien DNA or alien essence, the Lagos inhabitants become kind of cyborgs. They become half human, half alien hybrids, and this is essentially the idea that I'm referring to as the Archabian dilemma or the Archabian tension. This rejection of essence. So they are not just one thing. They negotiate. Difference becomes a hyper-imperative. They negotiate a kind of relationality between one thing and the next. So this is like when the human inhabitants inhale alien DNA, they become cyborgs. They become half human, half alien hybrids. Now within this particular diegetic world, we also have, as I have said, beings that shuttle between the metaphysical, which is the unseen world, and the seen world. So we have a Eshu Elegbara, the trickster deity who, you know, in the novel shuttles between a computer world and the material world. So this is the world that Okorafor creates. Is a world that rejects essences, a world that rejects absolutes in favor of a multi-spatial kind of relationality. Now, as a way to conclude, why this is important is that when we look at the context of Africa and what has been this kind of paranoia about difference and different bodies. So in Ghana, we've had xenophobic violence that tends to have its source in ethnic tensions and sectarian conflicts, religious differences. I know that in Nigeria there is the Biafra war that we can talk about, the Biafra military conflict. There is Rwanda's Hutu and Tutsi military conflicts. So in all of these military or in all of these conflicts, there's the essence of the body as different, and the essence of the body as the hypermarker that initiates or that inaugurates that kind of conflict. And so in Okorafor's multi-spatial world, there is a rejection of that idea of absolutes and essences in favor of a more convivial relationship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Edmund. I see that Faith has now joined us. Faith, are you willing to go ahead and present now, or you want to catch your breath and let Adesuchi present, and then after that you can do your presentation?
And good morning, everyone. I would like to begin. Sorry for the community. But I'll start by sharing my screen.
You can share, just ask to share, yeah.
No, I sent the request. Okay, okay, let's do my okay. Okay, good. I can see now. Sorry, a minute, please. Okay. Okay. Good morning. Sorry for the delay. My name is Kishin Rabobi, and I was speaking on Echoes of Lagos in Indigenous Written Verses. Lagos has long figured prominently in literary emanation, not merely as setting alone, but as vibrant character, reflecting a wide spectrum. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Or am I talking? Hello?
Go ahead. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Lagos has been featured prominently in literary imagination, not merely as a setting, but as a vibrant character, reflecting the wide spectrum of human experiences in urban spaces. In African literature, it has emerged as a dynamic entity that mirrors sociocultural transformation and friction between tradition and modernity. Western literature on works like from Ekwensi, People of the City, Tejuko, and Sefiata, all depicted Lagos from an Anglophone literature or from an Anglophone view. So, and this has inspired countless creative expressions too in the work. So, but aside from this Anglophone literary artists, notably but yet underexplored is the contribution of indigenous literary authors who have chronicled Lagos with equal nuances through strategies that evoke a different and intimate relationship with the city. Their text present Lagos not just as an urban city or urban entity, but as a culturally resonant symbol filtered through linguistics and cultural frameworks. Unlike the Anglophone counterparts, indigenous authors foreground the oral tradition that are often absent and or diluted in Anglophone narratives. Why this works on literature from Anglophone narrative have mapped Lagos through modernist and post-colonial lenses. There still remains a significant gap in the formalist analysis of indigenous political representation of Lagos. And this is what these studies seek to address. So this study therefore examine how Lagos is culturally constructed and culturally encoded in indigenous poetry. Its objectives are to identify the poems, structural linguistic devices, and also evaluate how these devices contribute to the thematic representation of Lagos. In line with this objective, the present study answered the following questions, which are what formalistic features are used and how did these features shape the thematic construction of Lagos? The methodology I'm going to approach in this study is the qualitative method, and the tests selected are Legacy by Iwe Kubuzo, which is found in Omenka 1992, and Tade Unileke by Dimeji Ajikobi, which is found in Oniko Shibebe. And the criteria for choosing this test is because of the artistic richness and the explicit focus on Lagos. So, and the theory that will foreground this study is the formalistic literary theory, which is meaning as intrinsic test, and it also focuses on the autonomous features of a text and its significance in constructing meaning. So the formalist criticism produces that meaning is embedded within a literary text structure, independent of external content. It emphasizes close reading, internal coherence, aesthetic arrangement, and so many devices. And in this framework, a poem is self-contained, is a content artifact, and interpretation should emerge from it internally. So this theory is especially pertinent for analyzing indigenous poetry, where form and sound are often encoded. So I'll go through to the analysis itself. So I'll start with Ikubuzo's Lagos. So in this poem, Ikubuzo constructs Lagos, which is an indigenized form of the name of the city itself, Lagos. So Ikubuzo constructs Lagos as a city of contradiction through asymmetrical standard structures and vivid linguistic choices. The poem unfolds in 6 distinct stanzas with unequal lines that are mostly enjambed thematic sequences. Each stanza builds upon the last, transitioning from the abstract metaphor to concrete social, spatial commentary. Imageries and symbolism are also found in the poem, which can be seen in the opening stanza, where it says, Ama ọgbakọ ụmụ ụwa, ịkwa ihe a na-azụrụ ọkụkọ ụmụ, aha na-ehu uju, ọtọgbọ onye nọ n'akụkụ, nrọ ndị ihu gị na-abụ anya. So in essence, this stanza symbolizes Lagos as an arena, a global meeting stage or point, which invoke a communal mythic space as seen in line 1. In line 2, contradiction abounds as it introduces nurturing amid precarity, a paradox emblematic of urban life. Then the musical imagery in line 3 gestures towards cultural resonance and identity, suggesting that Lagos is not heard.
Yeah, it's from Iraq.
It's from that.
Yeah.
It's a problem with that, like.
It's a network.
Oh, okay. She's frozen on the screen.
Yeah. Yes, it's good.
That's fine. Let's give a few minutes.
Yeah.
She still has about 7 to here, be about 10.
Yes. Hello, I'm sorry, I was kicked out. I don't know. My network, I guess.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Did I continue?
Yes, continue. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next, you share the screen.
Yes, she can. Yeah, you can.
Okay. Okay, so as I was saying, from the I'll go back to the form and stanza, which I said the artistic stanza with all even line, enjambment for thematic flows and layered and symbolic imagery, which shows convergence and survival. So the next stanza shows a lot of imagery and symbols in the poem where Ibubuzo showed a lot of contradictions in line 2. Also symbolizes Lagos as a meeting or global stage of humanity. Then line 3 also suggests gestures towards the cultural resonance and identity of Lagos, suggesting that it is not only heard but felt viscerally, like the vibration of the musical pulse would do. Line 4 and 5 subtly pivot the reader's attention towards the embodied experience of those living at the margins and those who long to see it. Just like you said, then imagery also abounds in the second stanza, where Lagos, where the poets explore Lagos as a microcosm of Nigerian society, as socially congested, economically stratified, and filled with ambition and deprivation. The stanza functions like a cinematic part, capturing the multiplicity of Lagos residents and their overlapping struggle, as seen in the poem Obodo Mmadụ Na-arịbe Elu, Achịwa ahụ akọ nakwa dibịa, achọ ndị ukwu anọghị, achọ ndị nta anọghị, achọ ndị isi na ndị ngwọrọ ma ha anọghị gị, kedụzikwanụ ndị ọrụ ha bụ so arịrịọ. So in short, in essence, Lagos is seen as a social arena that contains all societal types. Then, poetic devices are played in the third, fourth, all through the fifth stanza, all through the sixth stanza. So the third and fourth stanza paints panoramic view of Lagos temporal and physical rhythm, capturing the relentless pulse of urban life, the repetition of Kwati, that which means everyday map is cyclical and unrelenting temporality. Movement becomes the city's defining metaphor. The typology of mobility, walking, running, commuting, trading, creates a rhythmic beat that reflects the lived chaos of urban transit. Words like okupo, which means rowdy, and giddy, which evoke the noise and frenzy of Lagos traffic, are used by the poets to describe this multifaceted city. Then the fifth stanza, Ikubuzo symbolizing Lagos as a bifurcated space. What it tried to do was invoke a geographical and economic binaries as seen in the rhetorical contrast. Ihunla Ikoyi na akwụkwọ rose ya. Have you seen Ikoyi and its Rose Boulevard? Ihu Victoria Island n'ụlọ ya. Ihukwala Mushin na apịtị ya. Ajegunle Bariga na Bataha. So all these are used by the poet to symbolize opulence and urban margins. Hence, the poet declared that Lagos is of two words in the line Lagos the Uwa Abo, as shown in the fifth stanza. So, and the fifth stanza critique Lagos systemic inequality, affirming the mutual exclusivity of privilege and marginality. So then the sixth stanza also shows some form of metaphor too, where we have Lagos Buakilu, Lagos is a bitter cola, which and also shows some sort of juxtaposition, where we have the word of the weak and the word of the poor as captured by the poem Logana Wubemi. And the poet says, if you are not in this world, you are in the other world. That means you can't be in the two space at the time. It's either you are rich or you are poor. So also, buttressing on the metaphor, the poet, we all know that Akilu Bitakola is a seed known in many African cultures for its symbolic and gustatory complexity. So it is bitter at first, but eventually it will mellow in the mouth. So this metaphor culturally encode Lagos as something subtly alluring initially harsh, but possibly rewarding over time. So I also went further to say Lagos, which means that it is not how you sound in the ear, that is not how you are, how we heard about you. is how we perceive you. So this actual experience of Lagos is not palatable at all. And this sudden delusionment reflects urban struggle, unpredictability and action embedded in it. So I'll move down to the second poem, Jokotade Onileke, which is written by Ajikobi. So in Jokotade Onileke, the poet unfolds a ballad which gradually morphs into a satirical allegory, revealing the poet's ambivalence towards the urban life. Though the poem is loosely structured and with a reverse,
The
with
message
some
is just
these
leaving.
lines. So Ajikobi adopts
Faith, just
Yeah,
letting you
drop
know, Faith, sorry for interrupting you. Just letting you know you have 3 minutes left.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay. So Ajikobi adopts an episodic figure that stage Lagos, which is that stage Eko, which is Yoruba name for Lagos, as a theatrical space brimming with contradictions. So he uses a character symbol and animal imagery to portray Lagos. And the character he used in this poem is Jokotade, a fashionable and a powerful bead merchant, to show the parallel and the parallel and the compress and the parallel contradictions, the parallel and contradiction of the city. Also, using animal imagery, Jacobi depict Lagos by saying, pé kíní kan ni kò ì ṣẹlẹ̀ lÉkòó tí kò sí ohun tí ó eyín ẹ̀yọ̀ èyí táwọn àgbọ̀n ilẹ̀ mìíràn rí tí wọ́n ní àkànwọ̀n kò tó nǹkan tágùntàn Èkó fi ń ṣèrànwọ́ sójú fúnni. So in essence, what the poet is trying to say is that there are so many abnormalities that happens in Lagos, which are absurd but has become normal with the time. So he employs guys by personifying Lagos as Igiro Cotton Danoru, and like he also which means or which translates to a firewood that destroys the fire and a noble wife fleeing with a concubine. Igiro Cotton Danoru àti Èkólàlè ti rí Èkólàlè tí ń lé Alárèdè sápàtà kọjá. So in essence, what he was trying to capture was that Lagos has so many abnormalities, and so what is a taboo in other places, Lagos people take it on as a badge of pride, as a badge of pride. So also parallelism as seen on the screen, prosody are all used by the poem to enrich, are all used by the poet to enrich his poem. So straight down to findings of the time. So this selected poem, the two poems have contrasting findings, and they also made at a point. So in contrast, the poems are structurally opposed to each other, as shown. Their tone for Lagos, it is as tone, Lagos offer a lyrical realism, while Jokotade Onileke adopts epic satire, echoing Yoruba for performative aesthetics. Also, both poems are, although stylistically distinct, also converge on several axes. For Lagos, both poems control Lagos not just as a setting, but as a character, defined by its contradiction and identity. And both poets also utilizes indigenous linguistic frameworks and formalistic devices to encode the social, cultural, and spiritual reality of the city itself. So, in conclusion, this study concludes that indigenous poetry provides a nuanced culturally embedded portrait of Lagos, distinct from dominant Anglophone narrative. And through this humanistic lens or analysis, it reveals that this poem encodes Lagos with symbolic depth, with a mixed texture and indigenous insight. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Faith, for that rich and insightful presentation. Now, we're going to call on Adesoji to do his presentation. Soji, we have about 45 minutes left. And so you and I have to try and squeeze in our presentations within half an hour. That way we can have enough time for Q&A with the audience. So,
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, sir?
yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I would like to share my screen.
You may proceed, please.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Chinyere, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and for giving me the baton of this presentation. My name is Adisoji Babalola. I am a PhD candidate in cultural studies at Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario, Canada. And the title of my presentation is Singing the City, Reconstructing Lagos Identity Through Afrobeat Music. Before I delve into my presentation, I would like to show you a very brief outline. I'll start with statement of problem, I'll move to argument, theoretical frameworks, methodology, play a short music video. I know that time is against us, like Prof just said, and then discuss some lyrical analysis so far, and then present my conclusion. Um, you know, I actually want to talk about how the global index, that ranks city all over the world, often place African city at the bottom of their hierarchy, of their ranking so far. And those metrics often, uh, involve, livability, lovability, sustainability, and, the index, reference African cities generally, including Lagos, I know as urban, as urbanity that is hopeless and has the worst quality of life. We understand that there are problems in major cities, across the globe. But what is inherent in that index, in the global livability index, is that it reproduces geopolitical stereotype of African urbans and relegate urban marginality itself, which endangers resistance to colonial logics and post-colonial trauma. In other words, I'm more interested in how uh, how the youths in Lagos are actually challenging these stereotypes, this stigma about Lagos, this single story, what scholars in literature have called a single story, or the danger of a single story about Africa, especially Chiamanda. So I'm actually interested in talking about how Afrobeat articulate Lagos City in a decolonial way that rejects this essentialist view of Lagos City as a stinking, or as a city that stinks, as a city of violence, as if that is the only thing that is going on in the city, and neglecting some of the youth agency, and improvised livings of Lagos youth so far. So, we all know that Afrobeat rules the world at the moment, and Afrobeat is the moment and the movement, So, with the rise of Afrobeat, studies on this youth culture have largely focused on issues like sexism, internet fraud, resistance, and for instance, Paul Hugo talks about the politics of pleasure so far in one of his articles. So, but yet, marginal attention has not been paid to how Afrobeat artists represent, Lagos City and renegotiate Lagos identity in the colonial ways. Against this backdrop, I explore how Afrobeat artists acknowledge the current excruciating realities of neoliberal violence in the city, and yet represent Lagos City and identity in their music in unique ways that resist colonial representation of African urbanity and and is for close future so far. So I therefore argue that despite the concentration of violence in terms of maybe talk about maybe youth criminality in most parts of Lagos and police brutality as well, if considering all problems that are actually ongoing in Lagos City, I argue that despite this concentration of violence confronting Lagos City and peoples, Afrobeat artists often demonstrate strong special allegiance to the city and deploy their music to articulate the metropolis as a hub of possibilities, subversion, transformative identity in a state of flux. In other words, just to follow up on what earlier speakers have mentioned, I am more interested in how Afrobeat project daily practices in Lagos, improvised practices in Lagos, how Afrobeat projects the attitude of the mind of Lagos youth. So I'm not just looking at Lagos as a physical, as a physical side, but also as a sense of belonging, as a site of subversion and resistance, as a moving city, constantly, changing. Even though we can say that there are a lot of violence, is also a site of hope. So there is, just like Chinwe said, Lagos is a site of contradiction, and complexity. So that's my interest. And I further argue that why Afrobeat plays a significant role in expanding Lagos economy through youth engagement, entrepreneurship and creativity. This urban youth culture also replicate similar power relations prevalent in other places. In other words, Afrobeat is also implicated in the promotion of capitalist ideologies, but this is not peculiar to Afrobeat. We also have that in hip hop and all that. So my arguments, I am actually uh, basing my argument or drawing um, from the frameworks of Abdul Malik and Paul Hugo to articulate this argument. And these frameworks are, the Uninhabitable by Abdul Malik and Paul Hugo, The Politics of Pleasure. Abdul Malik talks about how the global south, is often configured as a site of the uninhabitable. In other words, it's a site of multidimensional violence, a site of precarity, a site where life is configured as death in life, or where life is reduced to bare life, in the words of Agembe. But Abdul Malik argues that the uninhabitable is not always or completely negative. In other words, the uninhabitable, over time formulates rhythms of endurance, through improvisations, creating new possibilities, generating transformations, unsettling post-colonial trauma. And that if we are going to be looking at global south as the site of uninhabitable, which Lagos is part of, we also have to look at those embedded practices, that are subverting some of these colonial and post-colonial configurations. So, and then to complement the uninhabitable, I draw also from Paul Hugo's The Politics of Pleasure. Hugo talks about how youth are activating their agency, through creative politics and practices, to resist oppressive logics. And Afrobeat, as we know, is a testimony to that. So Hugo here emphasizes how Afrobeat, evokes, African joy within and outside coloniality. What does Afrobeat, do to us as African, despite our daily struggle. So I'm drawing on Hugo's idea of the politics of pleasure, which involves using music to rehumanize, and to colonize the body so far. Even the art of dancing itself can be decolonial because the way the global south is configured as a site and as people without agency. So my methodology actually involves purposive sampling of Afrobeat lyrics, music video, and a close reading of lyrics. I would quickly like to play a song. I Sorry, can you hear this music? So can you hear this music?
No,
It's not.
no, there's no sound.
There's no sound, but you can
No.
see the video.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me quickly stop sharing and see if I can play a song that will give us sound. Think. Okay, just to avoid okay. Sorry about that. Just trying to, but maybe I may have to continue without playing this to avoid wasting our time. Unfortunately, um, yeah, I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, I'm struggling with how to ensure that we all have sound, but I think just to avoid wasting our time. So I'm going to delve into the analysis, but I wanted to play a song uh, from Kiss Daniel and also from Olamide. And the song by Kiss Daniel is titled Echo. And one verse that resonated with me in that song is in Pidgin. If you know feel wise for Lagos, you know feel wise for anywhere, you understand. So as I was listening to that song, I was asking myself what Kiss Daniel actually trying to convey to us through this verse, that if you know feel wise for Lagos, you know feel wise for anywhere you understand. So for me, I read this verse, as a way in which Kizz Daniel articulate Lagos, not just as a site of struggle and lack and precarity and violence, but as also a site of epistemic articulation, intellectualism, consciousness, subversion, and fluid identity in motion. In other words, Kizz Daniel rejects essentialist view of Lagos, and project Lagos as a site of constant performance, surprises, and and liquid identity. In other words, Lagos is a site of everything, and that is what that's a reflection of most cities across the globe. Even in Toronto, there are also crime. There are positive aspects of the city, and there are also negative aspects of the city. So the city becomes a site of transformative learning, and that's what I think that Kizz Daniel is projecting here. And then I moved to Olamide song titled "I Love Lagos."
So
Olamide here talks about.
So you have 5 minutes.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Olamide here talks about especially the word jaye here, which is what Hugo calls the politics of pleasure, and what I would like to call the politics of frivolities. In other words, the ability, the capacity to activate our agency with respect to having a sense of joy from within, So here, what resonates with me again is that Olamide, even despite the fact that he's a global artist who goes to Malaysia, as written in the verse, Malaysia, Berlin, and all that, Olamide says, tó bá káàkiri gbogbo àgbáyé, tó bá ti sún mi, màá lọlé. When I have toured, around the globe and I'm exhausted, I get back home, or I go back home. In other words, Olamide here is projecting Lagos as home. And home here is not just that physical geography, but a sense of belonging, a sense of belonging, a sense of affinity, of connection. So Lagos is that site, where Olamide, shows his allegiance here in his music. So, and he talks about Lagos, that in Ozu in my city, made it in my city, God bless my city. In other words, projecting Lagos as a site of new possibilities and all that. So, at the same time, Zlatan, Lagos Item, talks about, there are so many good things in Lagos. For instance, he mentions Lambo truck, Rolls Royce, and all that. Even though we can say that Zlatan here is projecting capitalist ideology in terms of evoking some of these, material things, like Bentley, Rolls Royce, and all that. In this song, we know that Zlatan is not projecting Lagos as the site of despair, right? In fact, it's projecting Lagos as a site where everything goes, where everything happens. If you want the negative aspect of it, it's there in Lagos. If you want the positive aspect, it's there. And that's why he's saying, Olori Buruku, Ide Lagos. Ati Akagom, Ide Lagos. At the same time, where there's Olori Buruku, where there's extreme poverty, where there is suffering and pain, then we also have Bentley, Rolls Royce. And so there's that contradiction there in representing Lagos. So to conclude, I conclude that Afrobeat music and its political narratives compel us to reimagine Lagos City and, by extension, African urban features, identity, and image, focusing not on negativity, but instead on their articulation of liberation and youth improvised lives. In other words, I conclude that Afrobeat movement, lyricism, and multimodalities evokes the urgency to rethink, redefine and reimagine Lagos identity outside and inside coloniality and within unfavorable global economic and political landscape. These are my references, and I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Sarah Schulist, for her support, and I would also like to thank my mentors, Professor Paul Ugo and Dr. Grace Adeni Yogniakin for their mentorship. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you so much, Suji. So you have my slides. Yeah, so thank you, Edmund, Suji, and Faith for your brilliant presentations. It's an incredible privilege and opportunity for me, honored matter for me to be sharing this thinking space with you guys. I'm going to try and keep my presentation very brief. So the work that I'm about to present is actually part of a broader ongoing project. We're going to flip to the next slide. Thank you. Book project focusing on the cinematic output of Femi Odubomi, who was a very famous Nollywood film director and TV producer. Femi was born and raised here in Lagos in the early 1960s, and at the young age of 16, moved to the United States to study film and television production at Montana State University in Bozeman. I completed this program in the mid-1980s, spent 1 year working as an intern in a private television station that was owned by the chair of the department where he studied, and then returned to Nigeria where he worked in broadcasting and advertising for 15 years before he founded his own private media production company. And since then, he has churned out quite sort of a massive body of work across different genres and television, documentary films, feature films, photography, and all of that. Now, part of what I'm trying to do in this book project then is to find ways to think about the main artistic vision that informs and underpins his cultural work in general, his entire body of work, whether it's in relation to photography, whether it is TV dramas, or whether it's documentary or feature films. You can flip to the next slide. And why is this relevant to the whole theme or the motif of Lagos itself? It's not only that Femi was born and raised in Lagos, it's not only that he is stationed in Lagos and works in a prison here, that Lagos is always the recurrent landscape in almost all of his films. So the backdrop, the narrative backdrop to his work is always Lagos. But I'm thinking about beyond the Lagos as a landscape for his work. I'm thinking about the ways in which Lagos also becomes sort of a moral and cultural landscape, and the particular kinds of employment strategies that he deploys to sort of document the kinds of cultural and moral shifts happening in urban settings. And this in this particular chapter, I look at two films. One is Morocco, which is the one I'm going to talk about briefly, where I sort of theorize the particular ways in which he uses that film to document and address what you might call sort of post-colonial cruelty. But in the second part of the chapter, which is the other film, Giddy Breeze, I talk about the ways in which he's doing he almost contradicts himself. He proposes that Lagos is a wicked city because it's marked by injustice, inequities, and cruelty. But in the other film, Giddy Blues, he's showing us Lagos as a site that is marked by the ethics of compassion and care. But however, I'm unable to finish that chapter, that second part of the chapter. So I just thought I'd focus on the first part alone to concentrate on the idea of the wicked city. But in general, I'm proposing the concept of Afropolitan humanism. And I use this term basically to designate a number of things. One is to capture Odubemi's transnational status as a Nollywood film director, right? Not only he was born in Lagos, but educated in the United States. His production institute and center is in Lagos, but one day he's in Dubai, the next time he's in New York, the next time he's in Abu Dhabi, the next time. So the particular ways in which he circulates, not just his films, how he himself circulates transnationally, and how that exposure to sort of cosmopolitan urban modernity, global modernity, informs his artistic vision. But also I use it to designate his avid ethical commitment in using screen media to create a vibrant public consciousness in what is supposed to be a new democratic culture in Nigeria, right? So I'm interested, not go back. So in many ways, I'm interested in the humanitarian uses to which Odubemi has put his screen media work as a committed social filmmaker. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. So in my presentation today, I want to focus on Odubemi's documentary, Makoko, Futures Afloat, which was released in 2016. Makoko is a classic example of how what I call a humanist advocacy is central to Odubemi's cinematic output, especially how he uses documentary film to engage his contemporary Nigerian society in thoughtful disputations about post-colonial misgovernance, the betrayal of public trust, and the consequent socioeconomic and psycho-existential threats that a collective culture of corruption and mediocrity poses to the lives of ordinary citizens. In the film, we see how he takes advantage of the public platform that documentaries offer filmmakers, not only as artists, but also as public intellectuals who make powerful social pronouncements about the human condition, especially about the grave consequences of the failure of the ruling elite, or failures of a ruling elite devoid of vision, foresight, and compassion for suffering citizens. So through the trope of social victims, Makoko reveals a society that essentially endangers or indirectly harms and kills its own citizens through a series of actions or inactions that the post-colonial ruling elites, who create a necropolitical system that basically determines who lives and thrives and who ultimately dies for want of basic access to the resources meant to be provided by the welfare state. Through my analysis of Makoko, I demonstrate how the film privileges crucial insights into Lagos as a wicked city, that is, as an urban space ruled by a particular form of noxious post-colonial governmentality, a pernicious kind of post-colonial necro power in which, as Ashilin Bembe notes, large swaths of vulnerable populations are kept alive, but in a state of injury, in a phantom-like world of horrors and intense cruelty and profanity. Next slide. I rarely read from the screen and I'm getting blind, so I'm trying to be creative there. Makoko is the story of one community's frantic efforts to get its children educated at these extraordinary arts. Set in contemporary Lagos, Nigeria, the documentary tells the story of the desperate efforts to establish the Winer Nursery Primary School in the airport community, popularly known as Makoko Waterfront area in Yaba, Lagos State. Perched on the coast of the Lagos mainland underneath the Third Mainland Bridge, along the Lagos Lagoon, and often referred to as the Venice of Africa, the area is distinguished for its intricate waterways. The locals live on improvised houses constructed with woods, bamboo, scrap metal, clapboards, tarpaulin, and corrugated iron roofs atop wooden steels. Makoko is a classic example of what Mike Davis has predicted to be the city of the future, which, according to him, rather than being made out of glass and steel as envisioned by earlier generations of urbanists, are instead largely constructed out of crude brick, straw, recycled plastic, cement blocks, and scrap works. It is an urban slum born out of the forces of rapid urbanism, overpopulation, and the disappearance of socioeconomic opportunities associated with neoliberalism. Estimated to be a population between 180,000 and 500,000 people. Locals commute through wooden boats, small wooden canes. Makoko's visual rhetoric is anchored on the juxtaposition of imagery, the glaring social injustice of a struggling working class neighborhood, leading a precarious existence on the edge of a bustling and thriving post-colonial African city like Lagos, is visualized through the contrast of images of stupendous wealth paralleled by urban squalor and decadence. In the film's opening scene, Lagos is featured as a resplendent megacity full of the accoutrements of postmodern metropolitan splendor and excess prosperity. The film's opening scene is an aerial shot of Lagos, showing skyscrapers and high-rise apartment views in the Atlantic city, formerly known as Morocco, marked by stunning postmodern architecture, elegant shopping complexes and government buildings such as the Lagos City Hall, three-lane dual carriageways busy with hundreds of sleek cars, a bustling seashore lively with transnational shipping vessels, an oil rig, a seaport with thousands of imported cars from abroad, the majestic and resplendent Lekki Ikoyi Bridge, an icon of postmodern design and affluence, and the Lagos Lagoon shore lined up with yacht and expensive private boats. So if you can click on that, I just want to show a short clip of it.
Oh, this one?
Yeah. Okay, you can pause it there. You can see how the camera comes from the top, right? It's gliding in, and what we encounter is imageries of excess wealth and consumption. And then as it goes further, we encounter precarious existence, right? And I'm going to sort of take on the ideas that my friend here, Kajetan, has said about this film. So as the business capital of Lagos, Nigeria, Lagos is visualized as the preeminent global megacity wired into international neoliberal economic networks of late capitalist wealth generation with an estimated GDP of 101 billion US dollars. According to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, Nigerian GDP estimated at the fourth quarter of 2024 was estimated at 199.7 billion US dollars, showing a steady growth of 2.98% year on. Makoko's figuration of Nigeria as a weak-head and a treasonous state, and Lagos as a weaker city, is the ways in which it unravels the inequitable distribution of its enormous wealth among its citizens. The stark contrast the film shows between the post-colonial magnificence of Lagos Island and the festering slum that Makoko is prefigures Lagos, I'm quoting Kajetan Iheka here, as a city of inequality with extreme wealth concentrated in certain parts of the city, while others manifest evidence of extreme poverty. What the opening scene of the documentary achieves, Kajetan Iheka argues, is to orient its audience to the bifurcation of space. We see how inequality plays out even within short distance. Makoko may be very close to Lagos Island, but the precarious existence of its inhabitants is radically different from the lifestyle of people occupying the offices and residents in the building seen in the opening of Odubeme's film, unquote. So Makoko shows the irony of post-colonial modernity in which stupendous wealth and egregious poverty exist side by side in the urban space. So, give 1 second. So using Lagos as its imaginative locus there, Makoko is a visual figuration of the key features of a wicked city. Commenting on the international status of Marseille as a wicked city, Nicholas Hewitt notes how France's first city, quote, was a frontier town with all the attendant lawlessness and disorientation. So King Alexander I of Yugoslavia had been assassinated there while on a state visit in 1934. Also in 1938, a huge fire engulfed the Nouvelle Galeries department store on the Cannery, killing 77 people. These events, Haywood argues, reinforce the perception of corruption and inefficiency at the very heart of Marseille's municipal government, shored up by organized crime. So I'm arguing here that what Makoko reveals of Lagos as a positive are sinister images of corruption, inefficiency, and cruelty. It captures metropolitan life in the global south, whereas Membe and Nuttall argues or note splendor and squalor exist side by side. But it is not just the outrageous wealth gap and the propinquity between post-colonial affluence and the economic streets in Makoko that the opening scene unveils. The film also suggests the depth of precarity by indicating that Makoko is literally buried beneath the glamorous surface of Lagos. Beneath the surface of Lagos's throbbing urban economy. As the camera scans through Atlantic and moves into the mainland in Ikeja and Ikorodu, showing a horrid mass urban population, yellow buses, rusted rooftops, small businesses dealing in various hardware, cheap clothing, food, and snacks, it finally hovers above the 10-kilometer Lagos State Bridge and then descends under the bridge to reveal the hidden horror of urban indigence and despair. As the high-angle camera floats above Makoko, we see rising smoke from burning debris, wooden canoes, and thousands of box-like structures that constitute the habitation of thousands of lives that make up the slum. It is a descent into the abyss of hell, no urban hell inhabited by those forsaken by the elites who so pretend over the astonishing wealth showcased in the opening shot. The camera literally creates a feeling of falling into a putrid cesspool. As a social purpose documentary committed to unveiling urban justice in the form of the unequal distribution of collective wealth, Makoko plays the activist role of public intelligence, in which, as Jonathan Kehane noted, radical artists and other cultural producers make visible the invisible, or phantom realities that shape the experience of the ordinary man in whose name power is exercised and contested. As a form of social documentary, what Makoko exudes in its activist intelligence work is a form of representational surveillance in which it creatively unmasks how devious forms of modern post-colonial governmentality alienate millions of citizens in Africa by subjecting them to social death or expulsion from humanity altogether. By exposing the facadism of post-colonial prosperity in Lagos and by extension Nigeria, Makoko can then be squarely placed within the Gracilian documentary tradition of humanist advocacy, in which, as Brian Whiston argues, hapless victims of an unjust social order are presented as the motivation for others very much removed from the specific location of suffering to be inspired to engage in social action designated to mitigate human harm. Thank you. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes. I would say 4 very rich presentations that have connections and resonances. But there are plenty of things to unpack there, but also sort of critique while I am arguing that Odugbemi sort of aesthetically frames Lagos as a site of cruelty and extreme inequalities. Adesoji is saying Lagos is a site of joy. and hedonism and agency of young people. And then we can see the differences. So I see lots of connections and disconnects in our presentation. And I'm hoping that people can speak to such things and also ask some questions. So I'll open the floor to the audience. Yes, please, Ruth.
Thank you for the vision. Whichever what you said, your presentation of the development. When I was a child, where Oriental Hotel is now, it was placed with show. I grew up in North Carolina. So as a young girl, usually show at the areas you have for example, where we have the city mall now. In fact, my thing every day, and I still keep asking myself, who will talk about this? Is as a child, we show to get Oriental self-safe. And Oriental, we all know that today, national stage, instead of Nigeria that can afford to go to Oriental, or just find, and this was the
around the subject or subjectivity of Lagos as a space. How is it different from say Cairo community or Abidjan to go to 12, 15 minutes presentation? But I think that some sort of engagement with that. Why is this exception? How is it different from other African cities? What makes it tick? What makes it such a phenomenon?
Yeah, and I don't know whether Edmund and Co, are you guys still online?
So are they searching about the
Yeah,
last?
we couldn't hear you, but
Oh,
we can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay, you didn't hear Chokpe's questions, and I'm just going to try and summarize it. and he agrees with most of the presentations, but I think he says that there's sort of an assumption, underlying assumption underpinning all of our presentations about exceptionalism of Lagos, and is wondering whether this construction, so this framing of the exceptionalism of Lagos doesn't pay attention to the ways in which Lagos could be contrasted with other urban cities, other mega cities in Africa, like Cairo or Kinshasa or Johannesburg or other African cities, right? So that's the question. And I am just going to jump in and give other panelists time to address your question. Much of what I do at the very beginning of this chapter is indeed to situate the work within some of the ongoing conversations around the African city, right? So I look at, for example, some of the work that Arthur Payson has done on Oxford Street in Accra, right? But also the kind of work that Ashila Bemba and Sarah Dutal have done around Johannesburg, right? But also the kind of work that Philip Dubois has done in Kinshasa, right? But Abdul-Rashid Siman and other people have done. So, but my argument is that in all of the scholarly interpretations of the African city, part of the insight you gain, right, is that there is what you might call a culture of cruelty that dominates all of these urban spaces, where the ruling elite in many ways are indifferent to human sufferings and other forms of social anguish experienced by ordinary people. That these are the things that, in other words, so that while the elite themselves occupy this prosperous enclave spaces that they've created for themselves, part of what artists are doing is document this sites of extreme privation of indigents that are essentially overshadowed by imageries of prosperity and modernity that you see in narratives, particularly in narratives, not only constructed by the ruling elite themselves, but also by neoliberal technocrats who have become really allies of the ruling elite. So you see those connections. But another broader point that I made, that this is not particularly, there's nothing particularly unique about this narrativization of Lagos. And I want to make the point that in my own chapter, at least, I do not make the point that there's something exceptional about Lagos. In fact, I'm arguing that in many ways, what we are looking at is the particular ways in which these artists are offering us an opportunity to do the kind of thoughtful interpretation of urban space done by Western writers or Western scholars. I'm talking about George Simmel, I'm talking about Jonathan Raban, I'm talking about Walter Benjamin, right? I'm talking about David Abbey. I'm talking about Pierre Bourdieu and all of these people who have always theorized the urban city, whether we're talking about Vienna, whether we're talking about Oxford or London, those kinds of things. And I'm saying these artists are giving us an opportunity to theorize the African urban space, not only as a site of architectural transformation, but a site of cultural shift that actually very often pose very difficult moral choices for people that live there. Yeah, okay, we've got to go. Okay, I've got to go. There's another panel. We can stay by the corridors and chat quickly. There's another panel. Okay, Ed Banda and all of the panelists, thank you so much for joining us.
Sir, let me come in.
Yes.